Welcome to This Isn't Working, the podcast for employers and employees who think it's time to talk about the failings of workplace culture and how we can do better. I'm your host, Tanya de Grunwald, an HR commentator who's watching, listening, and hopefully asking the right questions. Okay, let's get this working.
Hi, everybody. This is the second half of a two-part conversation with the writer and commentator James Esses. For 3 years, James has been reporting on the missteps that organisations seem to be making around diversity, equity and inclusion, particularly around race and trans inclusion. Now, James doesn't claim to have deep knowledge of HR, and he doesn't get a say in your policy or strategy. And trigger warning, some of his views may jar. But I think it's important to hear him out, as James represents a growing number of employees who feel resentful about what they view as divisive and unhelpful DEI policies and practices being inflicted on them by their employer without their consent. This conversation covers a lot of ground, including whether employers' efforts to address racial discrimination have made things better or worse, and whether we should be more conscious of the ethics around our attempts to level the playing field, even if the adjustments we're making are lawful. You'll also hear us discuss why some of the recommendations in the CIPD's Trans Inclusion Guide raised eyebrows among HR professionals in the UK, and whether some of the advice in that document is inaccurate and misleading. With Donald Trump moving back into the White House in January, DEI looks set to be a red-hot topic in 2025 on both sides of the Atlantic. So now's a good time for employers to assess their strategy for the year ahead and make sure that all perspectives have been considered and risks have been mitigated. Just one more thing for HR professionals who are listening. If you enjoy these conversations and would value speaking to other employers who share an interest in these topics, do get in touch with me via LinkedIn. We'll be launching a new community in the spring, so this is your chance to shape those plans. Okay, I'll let you enjoy the episode. Here's the second half of my conversation with James Esses.
Can I just mention before we move on from equity that the Conservative Party have dabbled in a little DEI themselves over the years, which I think people rather conveniently forget. And I don't know what you think about this. So I think it was around 2005, David Cameron, who was the UK Prime Minister then, brought in what, I don't know if it was called this at the time, it was this A-list. It was like a short list of some kind of mechanism. I don't quite understand all the details, but I think what he did was create a short list for the safe seats to be given to certain candidates in order to increase representation, particularly of women and ethnic minority people, because it was shockingly low at the time. And this is kind of considered like something kind of cool that he did kind of quietly. I think he got a bit of pushback at the time because Conservatives weren't big on what they saw as positive discrimination. It sounds to me like he actually brought in a quota because he said half of this A-list had to be women. Now that's a very clear quota. If you're putting a percentage on something and saying that will be it, that's a quota, and that is, as my understanding is, not lawful in this country. Now these weren't actual jobs, so he may have got around it by then, or maybe just nobody checked because he was Prime Minister and he wanted to do it. I don't know. He also said we want a disproportionate number. He said a large. It's something like a large proportion of ethnic minority. Well, that shouldn't be that large in this country. It's not, you're doing, basically he was engineering it. And as a result, we ended up with an awful lot more ethnic minority people sitting on the front bench in the Conservative government who came in around 2005 and onwards, because then presumably the party sort of looked more inclusive, therefore encouraging more people to join from different backgrounds. So that's definitely something that, and people sort of kind of forget this kind of thing. And they're like, oh, isn't the Conservative Party so wonderful because they've got all these diverse people on the front bench, which I think is a positive thing. But then quite a lot of these people are also now anti-DEI, which I find quite interesting because I think there are benefits to it. I'm just saying that people conveniently forget that actually a lot of the brilliant people who, whether you think the Conservatives are brilliant or not, there are some very strong performers there, and a lot of them are there. I'm not saying they're not there on merit. I think they are there on merit, but they're there because something happened to encourage them in at a certain time, and they did very well. They worked very hard, and they got those roles. So I think we look around all the time, we don't realize that the people doing a brilliant job in these roles, who are from minorities, who are from women, may have had what you would call a helping hand. But I think on balance, it's probably a good thing. But I don't know.
I mean, the flip side, Tanya, is that I come across people on a regular basis. I'm not going to name any names in politics and elsewhere who are only where they are because they fall into one of these minority categories. That's, so, and I'm really...
There's also a lot of very mediocre men out there who are in roles that you think, what's so special about him? No?
Yeah, our entire political class, there's a real sense of disillusionment about who are becoming chosen as party candidates. And people are often saying, is this the very best that we've got to offer? And so I kind of agree with that across the board. But maybe it's not really working for anybody. Maybe that's the conclusion of this conversation. Honestly, I think it's the logical conclusion. But going back to your point around the Conservative Party in particular, what I don't like is hypocrisy. And this is something I value particularly about someone like Kemi Badenoch, because she had an opportunity before she became an MP, when she was still trying to get selected as a candidate. She had an opportunity to essentially go through on this list, which would have bumped her to the top and given her a much easier pathway towards becoming, an approved candidate in a winnable seat. And she specifically chose not to go down that. She said she wanted to succeed on her own merits. So for that alone, I've got a huge amount of respect for her. I think it's very telling. And that's what I would like to encourage. I kind of want that to be the role model out to the rest of the country, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think, we've had a good chat here about the kind of nitty-gritty of some of the sort of things that people are doing. And I think things like subsidised and funded tech courses for women only. I've got questions about some of that stuff. I think things like confidence sessions during the recruitment process. We've touched on some of that for women, ethnic minorities, LGBT and neurodiversity. I think we need to get back to asking exactly why we're doing that. But things like, there's certain groups, particularly girls, young women from certain backgrounds, will, for example, be very unlikely to ask a question or unlikely to be particularly forthright at an assessment centre, unless you literally say to them beforehand, make sure you say something in these conversations, because if you don't, you'll be marked down. Say, make sure you ask a question, make sure you go and talk to the senior person. Those people who are totally brilliant, these women, and totally capable, might just need to be told that, whereas other people don't need to be told that. I don't know. This is, again, I get exactly what you mean. I just think it's interesting when we get down to the nitty gritty and things like with the assessment process. So if the employers, some of the employers I work with are absolutely massive, and they're really forensic in terms of they go back and look at who didn't do well in their recruitment process. Once it's all finished, they will go back and go through every single line and be like, where did we lose our ethnic minorities? Where did we lose our women? Is there anything we want to change for next year? What's not working, what worked and what didn't work. And if they see that one particular question trips up a certain group, so say women perform particularly badly on this one question, women who applied do not get this question, and they give a really rubbish answer, and for some reason, and then you can't put them forward for the next round because they did so poorly on that question. And then you think, well, what is that merit? Okay, they're not good at that question. And then you think, do we even like the question? Is it reasonable for the employer to go, why are we even asking that question? Do we need the question? Does the question tell us anything that the previous 4 questions, which they answered fine, didn't already tell us? If it's not there for a reason, can we just get rid of the question? So what they will do is they will get rid of the question, because if it's not serving a purpose and it's getting rid of some talent that they want to keep in the pipeline, they just bin it. And I don't have a problem with that either. What I do have a problem with is things like, you're going to freak out with this. If you have
I'm already freaking out. Yeah, go on.
See, this is why it's good to chat, you see, across the divide.
Go on.
So things like, if you've got a longer recruitment window for some groups than you have for other groups, because you know that it will take longer to get them engaged, you have to take them along the process, you have to give them confidence training, all that sort of stuff. That's going to take 2 months, not 2 weeks, but you keep the application window, keep the application window shorter for the groups that you'll already get plenty of candidates for. Now, I think that is heading towards being the wrong side of the line for me. I can tell by your face. Our audio listeners will not see your face. But you're not loving that one I'm getting? No. Okay. Yeah, they're doing this stuff. That's legal. Because it's not that you couldn't apply if you're from one of the other groups, one of the overrepresented groups, but they're just deliberately making it harder for you and easier for certain other groups. I think we're getting into iffy territory. I think you do too.
No, it's
not
lovely.
my decision to make. It's not my decision to make, but it's a question worth asking, I think.
No, it's great. It's great stuff. Look, why stop there? Why don't we just give them the answers to the questions? Why not?
Well, quite, yeah. Interestingly, I think when some people who already work at that organisation found out that was happening, they were not best pleased, because they were like, well, my kids wouldn't have got in because you only gave them 2 weeks to apply.
Precisely.
Whereas, and I think at that point you're like, have we got this? Even though it's legal, is it the wrong side of the line? What are we doing with this? So I think that's reasonable.
But I'm interested, because I think I see this across the board, like with the example you just gave of, women seem to be getting this question wrong. We need to now unpick why that is or something. It's like this assumption there must be something going on here, something that kind of needs fixing. And I think we're actually doing a disservice to a lot of women out there as well. The message has been sent to young girls. It's not that they're as capable as the boys, but they should be doing the things the boys do. And I actually think this, to some extent, if they're not doing the things the boys do, they've got no excuse for it. They should be better than the boys. And I've got a number of close friends, colleagues, etc., who went for university courses and into vocations that historically women have been underrepresented, required a lot of intellect, a lot of hard work, a lot of money, spent years and years and years. They get to it, they realise they actually don't like it very much, and then when they've had children, they realise that actually all they want to do is be a stay-at-home mother. And then I've spoken with some of them about this, and the kind of guilt they feel, the shame. They think, I wasted my parents' money doing this course and all this time, and why couldn't I make a success of it? And why don't I want to be out there kind of in a senior role? Why is it that I just want to be at home with my kids? And people view like homemakers with some sort of level of kind of disdain, like, what, this is the 21st century. I think we're doing a real disservice to women out there, because we've sent a message to them that they should be out there doing what the guys are doing. And I just think it's a load of rubbish. And for women who have decided, who just feel that kind of way, even from a young age, that they would like to raise a family and be a homemaker, I think we should be encouraging that in them, not telling them, no, you need to go to university, and by the way, you need to do either law, medicine, or accountancy or whatever. Like, we don't.
But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, if they want the jobs and they're bright enough to get the jobs and they're just screwing up one question, or they're not that confident going in. I don't agree, because I think if they do get the job, they've got more options. If it turns out, that they don't have children or whatever, their life doesn't go in that direction, they've got more options if at least they've got a damn good job behind them and they've got a career going. I don't like the idea of women kind of selling themselves short because they think they want to have a family. As we all know, your life turns out in different ways. Things change, so you want to have as many options as possible. And I think for women, being financially stable on your own is really, really important. And
Tanya, I'll do a little. We're friends, so I can do this. I'm going to do a little gentle challenge back to you, which is that you use the phrase "selling themselves short." And it's like, why is that selling oneself short? Why is it not as fulfilling and valuable in society as anything else? But
I'm not saying against that. I'm saying not going for a job because you think, oh well, I only want to be, I only want to be a mum anyway. I'm saying that's what they're saying in their head, that they wouldn't go for the job, and I want to give them the option. So go for the job, get the job. If it turns out you meet someone nice and you want to have children later, great, but at least you've got some options there. I don't want them to think, oh well, I probably won't do this for more than a few years anyway because I'm probably going to get married, and maybe they won't. Maybe I didn't express that properly. Okay, let's move on to talk about inclusion, which I think is one of those words that's a little bit slippery. I think when it was first used, we could think of it as only being a good thing. Who doesn't want to be inclusive? It's all about being welcoming. What's not to love? I think it's turned out to be a word that employers need to be a little bit careful of, if I'm honest. And we're seeing a lot of bad practice coming in to the workplace. Some of the stuff that you mentioned actually at the start of this call with the employers that you mentioned, those brands, and it's coming in to policy as well. So policy decisions are being made that shouldn't be made, and is being applied in ways that shouldn't be applied. I think to be fair to employers, I think they've had a lot of bad policy advice. I think that they have been let down by organisations that they should be able to trust. I think sometimes their own lawyers are getting this wrong. which is extremely unhelpful. I would point the finger at the CIPD, which is the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, who are the kind of industry body for HR. For example, I don't know if you ever saw, I know this is more your area than mine, their trans and non-binary inclusion guide contained a number of what are frankly mistakes, which could have got employers into trouble and actually may well have done. I think we're seeing a few cases coming to court soon, coming to employment tribunal, where they actually got some stuff wrong. Now, they published that in September 2023. They sat on it apparently since February 2023. So they sat on it for most of the year because they were worried about how it would go down. Now, I would have used that time to show it to the people that you think are going to hate it and therefore make sure you got it right. But they didn't. They launched it in 2023, September. They had immediate pushback from it, from Sex Matters. I think Legal Feminists did a really thorough piece of work on it. Lots of people didn't like it for all sorts of reasons. Lots of employers didn't like it for lots of reasons. But it's been out for a year. They recently pulled it from the website, so it's now not there anymore. And a revised version seems to have appeared, which is better. But that iffy guide has been knocking around for a year. And I have heard people referring to it as being the gold standard. Well, this is the CIPD's guide. So, and I think, CIPD members have a right to expect that anything produced by the CIPD should be pretty good. It's not. So I think that was a problem. I mean, there was also some quite strange stuff in it. Like there was very strong non-neutral language all the way through it. So that they stay on page 2. It started with a glossary, and the first word was cisgender, which is a really controversial word, and it's really kind of ideologically driven. They talked about assigned at birth all the way through, the trans umbrella. We got into gender fluid, all the rest of it. Which is just, these are all really contested ideas, and they were presented as facts the whole way through. Even gender identity is a contested idea. It was presented as fact the whole way through. So I heard also there was a bit that raised the most eyebrows was, this is among HR people, there was a bit about gender fluid employees, who I understand are people who their gender identity seems to shift from day to day. So the advice from CIPD was to be flexible around these individuals, and if they've got 2 names, that should be okay. You should make sure your systems work for 2 names. They should have 2 lanyards, 2 security lanyards. They should have 2 email addresses, which I understand is very difficult for your IT department to do. But anyway, and at that point, HR people were going, hang on a minute, what are we doing here? This seems like an awful lot of work. I'm not sure if this is right. At what point can we say, I'm not sure this is reasonable? There was also a suggestion that they should get time off for, I think some trans identifying people should get time off for things like hair removal, which I'm guessing you're not in favour of. Is that a yay or a nay for that one? I'm guessing that's a nay.
You think, Tanya?
Okay, that's a no. It's a no. Yeah, lots of employers had the same response, which is even if you're on the kind of let's be inclusive bus, you're still like, hang on a minute, at some point this is getting a bit unreasonable. So I think they should have been able to trust that kind of thing, and they couldn't. Now, that if that's crept into policy, which I think it has in lots of organisations, that's a problem. I've heard that the ACAS document is also similarly written in a way. It's written by someone who clearly believes in gender identity, which some people do, but some people don't. And it shouldn't be written by somebody who clearly does, in my opinion. That's not neutral. So some of this stuff has crept into policy, which is now being applied, and it's being applied by people with little to no legal training. And this is something that came out from my conversation with Neil Morrison, the HR director, who said, I said, what percentage of HR and DEI people do you think have a solid understanding of the Equality Act? He said less than 10%.
Right.
Yeah. And then I said, aren't you concerned about that? And he didn't seem to be concerned, because he said, look, no, because their role is to apply policy, and the policy should be written in line with the law. Therefore, it should be fine. There is some logic. I think that's flawed logic, as I suspect you do too, but there is some logic there. But if bad policy is being written, then we've got a big problem here. So again, this is another way that I think it's all about the detail of what's happening here. Another problem with policy is coming from staff networks, and you mentioned this before, that staff networks, particularly I think LGBT, but not only, seem to have become quite political and quite activisty. And I think they're taking up a lot of time as well from people. It just seems to be like a kind of hobby on the side, but it's kind of part of your job. But is it part of your job? Also, a lot of these groups are no longer representative of the people that they claim to be representative of, which is something I talked to Kate Barker from LGBT Alliance about. She says lesbians tend to be very underrepresented within LGBT groups because they don't have the right views and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you can listen to that interview. So I think there's a problem with the staff networks. And you've seen how when staff networks are given too much kind of, frankly, budget for that magazine, for example, at John Lewis, they seem to be like, there's not enough supervision around it. And they seem to be allowed to kind of go off in any direction with no guardrails around them at all. Would you agree with that?
Mm. Again, if there was, senior leaders in an organization coming out with kind of homophobic rhetoric or whatever, then I could understand the benefit of a staff network and essentially, wanting to call it out and kind of protect their members, I guess, against that. But that's not what's happening. They're getting kind of VIP treatment. I mean, I've seen this in the civil service, which is where I used to work, that you've got permanent secretaries who are kind of diversity champions for each one of these kind of staff network groups. And that entitles the groups to kind of regular face-to-face meetings with these champions. I mean, myself and others working in policy who would struggle to get a paper before a permanent secretary. They're that busy. But these staff networks have kind of carte blanche access to them as and when they want, almost. It's too much. And so like I said, I don't even see the purpose. I do not see the purpose in many of these staff networks. As I said, we don't live in a systemically racist, homophobic, etc. society. This is where you get this kind of overreach. I mean, this is kind of what was labelled at Stonewall, which is that they kind of fulfilled their purpose, basically. They'd achieved everything they set out to achieve, and then they needed to find something else to do, some other campaign to, attach themselves to. And that's how the T got introduced to the LGB, and well, the rest is history. And so I find similar with these staff networks is that they're actually working in very tolerant places, but now they want to go and have a hand in all of the policies. Now they want to kind of make sure that, bathrooms are unisex and all the rest of it. Now they want to try and kind of influence, what charities their company might donate to. They want to encourage their senior leaders to come out to pride marches, etc. It's like overstepping the mark.
I think actually, I mean, in answer to your question about what they were doing in the first place, I agree that there has been a sense that there's a mission creep seems to have happened there. And I think they were originally started to be as a sort of informal, literally almost like a social network of here are loads of other women who work in this organization, so that you, particularly as a junior woman, because you've got this network of, kind of friendly faces who you might see around, hey, how's it going, la, 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 and therefore, and for your Black employees as well. Like, I kind of get that it was when these, I kind of get where it was coming from. I think it was possibly always flawed, and then you started getting the organizations looking at these groups as being sort of free consultancy with what should we do for our customers from these groups. What do women want? Hey, let's ask the women's group what they want. So, we're going into different ethnic groups. Hey, let's ask the Black plus group what they think, disability. Again, you can sort of see why, and then it was like, oh, what's great to get their input, and they put included, blah, blah, blah. You kind of see where that's going. I think I agree with you that we are very close to the line of thinking, are these things causing more harm than good? It's not really about what I think, but if you're asking my personal opinion from the bunch of people I have spoken to recently about this, and from what people are telling me, I think we need to get back to making a case for staff groups rather than why we should get rid of them. It seems to be more divisive than it is helpful as far as I can see. So I think there might be movement around that, or at least we need some better structures around them, or better goals, or what is this really for? And I think particularly when, I've heard people talking about like a mental health, staff network for people who are struggling at work. I just think, oh my God, this is like an unsupervised therapy group for people that are having a really tough time. This is going to turn into co-rumination. This is not healthy. Who is supervising this thing? I just think that feels like a really bad idea to me. You can see why it sounds like a good idea, but I just don't think it is. And I think we need to probably start taking that sort of all the well-being stuff, I think, needs to come out of the workplace. Lots of the big organizations will have a helpline you can call if you're having trouble. Please call that helpline. And if you're not fit to work, we will support you, blah, blah, blah. But I'm worried about this whole well-being thing coming in as part of DEI. I think that's not positive for me. I think it's not I don't think it's reasonable to expect your colleagues to be responsible for your own mental health or your own well-being. And I don't like the way that if there is a problem with a staff member or, dare I say, somebody, doesn't come back to work one day, everybody has to look at themselves and wonder what they could have done differently to support that person more. I just think that's too much to put onto colleagues. People go to work because they want to earn money, they want to do their job, and they want to come home. Of course, if you know someone's struggling, give them a hand. But I worry about it particularly at junior level, because I think I can see how, particularly on like quite tough graduate schemes, for example, if you're saying to everybody, hey, make sure you look out for your friends and let us know if you know someone who's struggling, you can see how a 22-year-old who's struggling with the scheme and therefore their mental health is going to confide in a friend who then has this information but is told not to tell anyone about it. And now it's all on them to deal with this situation. They're not qualified to do that. They're not experienced enough to deal with that. So I'm not really quite sure that that's helpful. Anyway, now I'm getting into wellbeing, which I think is coming into DEI. So I'm glad that I touched on it. But
I think you're right. I think there's as I said earlier, there's far too much mollycoddling. I came across, I can't remember which organisation it was, but it was a kind of unconscious bias and microaggression training. And he was suggesting that if like a group of girls from the workplace kind of go out like for dinner or something and they don't invite like their male colleague or something, that could be a microaggression, and vice versa. And it's like, I don't want my workplace telling me who I can and cannot be friends with. And if the girls want to hang out with the girls and the guys want to hang out with the guys because that's who they get on with more, because they've got more in common, whatever, so be it. This isn't primary school, these are adults. We've got people performing, rigorous jobs, of high public importance, using a lot of intelligence and skills, and yet they're being treated like they're bloody playground children. We've kind of encouraged this now, which I think is bad. And going back to your point on the kind of staff networks and the kind of mission creep and all the rest of it, it baffles me how much time people seem to be spending in the workplace talking about their sex lives. I honestly find it very, very bizarre. Yeah. I mean, this whole idea of bring yourself to work. And I read something recently, I think it was someone from an NHS trust, and they were saying that what they really valued was that they could openly talk about their asexuality with all of their colleagues and kind of, on a regular basis. Like, who wants to have these conversations? Can some things not be for one's own private and personal life rather than need to be broadcast everywhere around the office? I mean, who cares? Who cares? Yeah. As I said, we're not living in a society in which if you're sleeping with the wrong kind of person, you're going to be fired or banged up in prison. So as far as I'm concerned, as long as we're accepting and respecting of everyone else, we don't need this stuff shoved in our face. I mean, I've certainly never gone to, I don't know about you, Tanya, but when I was working in office, I wasn't going around talking about my sex life on a frequent basis. It's not relevant.
Yeah, I mean, the employers would say, look, we collect data on sexual orientation because we need to protect ourselves in case we have a discrimination claim against us for, say, not giving somebody a promotion because they're gay. And we need to be able to compare it with, well, this is what we did to previous people who were straight, and so you've got the comparator data. So I do understand why they're doing it. I am coming around to thinking, I still think it's weird, though. It's just none of your business. I mean, I get why they want that information for their own data, but I just think it's I just don't think it's anyone's business. But I mean, yeah, all the stuff on gender identity is not even necessary. So I don't know why we're collecting that, because there isn't anything, there's no case where you would need to collect that, possibly with sex reassignment, but certainly not gender identity. So I think some of that stuff seems to be a bit of an overreach. We just seem to be asking just because we're nosy, or we want to say how great we are at how much we've improved in the last year or something, which is not surely the point of it. There's also a lot of stuff I think about language policing, which is coming in the kind of inclusion piece, where I think we need to redraw the lines. And I think that touches on this kind of belief discrimination, which we're seeing a lot of in the UK, particularly around gender critical views. So, and it's kind of like we need to redraw that line and say, like, as long as you're not harassing each other, you're allowed your opinion, your big beliefs. You're also allowed to express them up to the point where you're harassing a colleague.
Yeah.
And that's where the line is. And I think people are not clear on that. And people are also use the word discrimination to mean something which it doesn't mean. It has a very specific meaning in law, and it's used in conversation as if anything is discrimination. So I think we need to be much clearer on that. I would like to see legal training for everybody, basic Equality Act. It's not even that hard, the Equality Act. I mean, you and I probably know it better than most of these people that work in HR. I certainly feel like I do. when I get into conversations, I realise how little they know. I'm a bloody journalist, James. I don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, apparently I know more than they do. And this whole idea of having like the right views. Can I come? I know you're dying to talk about the Matt Walsh film, Am I Racist, which you and I have both seen. We have not discussed it. My prediction is that you loved it. It felt like slipping into a warm bath. Am I right? Did you love it? Because I'm hoping that this will then bring us on to talking about training, dodgy training, or just like the weird vibe around some of these particularly very poor quality training sessions which are being run. This is particularly around race, but we've seen a lot of them around gender and stuff as well. And also, I think it did a really good job of showing, particularly in America, which is more extreme than here, a really bloated industry that has been allowed to just run away with itself. And there are a lot of people who, frankly, I can't find a word better than grifter to describe them. They are just making quite a lot of money peddling stuff that they seem to be either pulling out of thin air or from some quite controversial authors. What did you think? Did you love it?
I thoroughly enjoyed it, actually. Yeah, I've been looking forward to watching it for a while. I mean, I do wonder about some of the people who actually fell for his quote-unquote disguise. I mean, some of these people must really be a bit thick, actually, because he looked like Matt Walsh, and I think he's obviously a much more household name over in the States, particularly in light of, What is a Woman and some of his other work. So I don't know how he got away with it.
He's a sort of provocateur, isn't he? He's a very prominent presenter on the Daily Wire, which is, did you say right wing, centre right, very right? No, centre right.
I think he's right wing, but he's got a certain style. He's got I think quite. He's got his own look and his own voice, to the point that he still looked and sounded like Matt Walsh. And some of these people, supposedly highly intelligent people, kind of fell for this whole act he was putting on, which
I wasn't surprised, because I think that's the echo chamber. I see a lot of these people who have no idea who I'm talking about when I say Matt Walsh, and they work in DEI, and I'm like, how do you not know who Matt Walsh is? And that's the echo chamber effect. So I was thinking the same as you, and I was thinking, no, but I do believe it. I do believe it, because I think they run away from anything they don't want to hear.
It must be the case. But I thought it was very, very good. It really, some of it was actually, even though I kind of knew it in my heart, it's shocking to see it. Some of what these grifters, you put it, are charging, even to just do a little interview with him or whatever. I mean, it's madness. That these people know exactly what they're doing, and I've got to give it to them. Like, they've played it strategically extremely well, and there's a lot of people getting very, very rich off this. I mean, but when they open their mouths and you listen to them talk, it all just falls away. But I was more interested with the people, for example, who are attending along with Matt's alter ego, who are attending these kind of DEI training sessions. And I'm listening to the kind of DEI instructor preaching what I consider to be absolute nonsense. But I look around at them and they look like they're almost in a religious church service or something like that. Like, they're looking up with a sense of like respect and admiration. And I'm looking and thinking, are we hearing the same thing here? So someone's crazy. It's either me or it's them. I still haven't worked out who that is yet. But I just, it's honestly mad. And for me, the craziest thing was the interaction with Robin DiAngelo, because even though she said it felt...
She's the author of... She's very well... I actually haven't read... She's the one that wrote White Fragility, right?
She's built an entire career about being essentially a kind of self-deprecating white woman who's wanting to call other white people into arms to kind of say that they need to kind of repent for the kind of the sins of the past. And, she's done very well out of it. But, in that clip there where Matt brings on one of his black colleagues and says, I'm going to pay him reparations from my wallet. And then he says to Robin, do you want to do the same? As a kind of way of showing our regret over, the harms done to the black community in the past. And she says, this feels weird. But then she goes to a person, gives them 20 quid or something. And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I mean, it was funny in two ways. It was funny because this demonstrates how far down this hole we've gotten, whereby people think that it's kind of moralistic to go and to just give 20 quid from your wallet to some black person that you've never met before simply because they're black. But it was also very amusing because I think she got paid $15,000 to be there. And she actually said, this 20 quid is all I've got. So it was funny in multiple angles, but it was honestly shocking stuff. I couldn't believe she did that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, coming back to what it made me think of in the UK was, I mean, I've attended quite a lot of training sessions around some of this stuff, webinars and stuff, just while I've been researching. And some of them are on race, some of them are on gender, all sorts of stuff. And I have been shocked by the low quality of much of it and how people are just kind of standing there seemingly just making stuff up or just using their own personal opinions or their own lived experiences. Lived experiences certainly become kind of weaponized. And I saw that in action on this film, and the way that a dynamic is created by having this wonderful learned person who's the trainer, who's pontificating and telling us all what we must think. And you've already created a very strange dynamic here, which is not really like any other classroom scenario. And then it becomes very clear that these are the correct views. And it becomes very clear that questioning them is really not acceptable. And that you must kind of get on board with all of it right from the start. And the only thing to do is just accept all of it at face value. Now, this is not education to me. This is much more like some kind of indoctrination. I don't know any kind of scenario where you're not allowed to ask questions. That immediately sets all the red flags off for me. So if anybody watching it has done any sort of DEI training, whether it's on race or anything else, that dynamic will feel familiar. And it's very weird. It's a very sort of culty thing where they don't say, some people think this, some people think this. This is quite a controversial idea. Some people like it, some people don't like it. Like, it's just no balance.
No balance.
And I think, so although they were quite extreme and they were quite American, I think for UK audiences who've sat through some of this stuff, they'd be like, you know what, that's not a million miles from the vibe of that weird thing I had to do. And, that weird woman they got in. I think quality control has been really low. And again, I mean, talking to Neil Morrison about this, the HR director, he said that around 2020, obviously that was the year of George Floyd, the market was suddenly flooded with suppliers, trainers in this space, basically because there was sudden demand from employers, which was sort of came from Me Too as well, which was a year or two before. And they suddenly were like, oh my God, we have to be seen to be doing something on all this DEI stuff. And these trainers seem to offer like quite quick fix kind of solutions that just show that we've done some training. So they flooded in. There was very little quality control. A lot of people recommended by a friend. Oh, this person's good. I've seen them do such and such. Again, as you say, the lack of diversity of cognitive thinking and political views meant that everybody who likes this person will also like this person and will see no problem with any of this. This is the progressive way. So you didn't have that diversity. You didn't have anyone going, hang on a minute, I'm not sure people that like voted Tory are going to be into this, or like, hang on a minute, this all seems a bit middle class and weird. Like, you didn't have enough questioning voices, or if they were there, they were silenced pretty quickly. So I think the market is to blame there, but I think they didn't have to use them if they thought they were talking nonsense. But I think rather like with Stonewall, which I did another episode on that, episode 5, I think it is, of this podcast, all about Stonewall. It's not because the organization itself as a whole thought, oh, these people are great, we love all their ideas. It's because they offered a quick, fairly affordable solution to tick a box. It doesn't mean that the whole organization, everybody that works there, thinks Robin DiAngelo is brilliant, or all the gender identity stuff is total fact and everyone's agreeing with it. It looks like a solution to a problem. I think it actually creates more problems, as you probably do too. But it seems like a solution, and that's where it's come from. I don't believe everyone at these huge organizations is on board. So when I see people saying that certain organizations, huge organizations, are like captured, I can see why it looks like that, because everything external facing looks like it's coming from a whole organization that all thinks the same way and is under some kind of spell. But I don't think that's true. I think it's the people that are responsible for the marketing and for the DEI stuff. The press officers clearly don't understand this stuff either, because whenever you give them a hard time, they never have a proper response. They're never ready. Yeah, I guess it showed a really bloated industry, I think, that has become detached from the workforces that it's supposed to represent. It's become detached from reality in some cases, and a huge amount of money is changing hands. I mean, like you say, when you saw when you saw The Expert and then they put the price tag on with the Matt Walsh film. It's like 15 grand for an hour with this person. Like I'd like some of that, please. $15,000.
It's absolutely mental. But I agree with you. I do think this is more about box ticking than anything else. But I don't see that as a lesser sin. Do you know what I mean? Actually, because the outcome's still the same. And I
think that's fair.
Like if an organisation is willing to be so blasé about this, chuck tens of thousands of pounds at this stuff to tick a box, then more fool them as far as I'm concerned. I don't care if they believe it or not. In fact, I'd almost rather they did believe it. At least then they could hold themselves out as being principled to their, sticking to their principles. But if they're doing it simply to kind of put on a pleasant veneer, I don't like that.
I don't think there's been enough. I don't think there's been enough oversight, particularly from HR directors. That's what Neil said as well. The sensible people have just kind of outsourced it to people they thought they could trust, and it turns out that they can't. I think there's a lot of problems with heads of DEI. We talked about that as well, who were hired for being really charismatic and really great at conferences and really, whatever. But actually, that's not what you need from a head of DEI. You need someone that can do balance, who doesn't make it all about themselves, who doesn't talk about their own politics in the workplace. You need somebody really careful, who's a little bit dull, frankly, to get the job done properly and think about everything really carefully. Now you've got a mismatch there, which is, I think, partly why it's gone wrong. I did want to just say, though, by the end of what's it called? Am I Racist? I was thinking, hang on a minute, he was getting a bit into, hey, let's just pretend that we're all the same and I don't see colour and all that. And although, you and I, we probably grew up in that time of like the sort of what you would call colourblind thinking, where you're just sort of not meant to notice race, not meant to talk about it. I think that was a bit weird too. And that's, I think, what he was talking about. Hey, let's just get back to just all being people. And it's like, well, it's easy to say that when you're white. And I just thought, if I was black watching this movie, would I find that a bit annoying? I think I probably would. So, he didn't seem to be saying that there was no such thing as racism, but I did think by the end of it, it was getting a bit trite in that way. But I did think he made a very good case for this is not better. Talking about this stuff and obsessing about all this stuff has not made it better. We've actually made it worse. We've overcorrected. If there was a problem in the first place, we've overcorrected it, and this is not the solution. I thought that was fair enough.
Well, there's a lot, there's often, and we know this is the case, comedians, and if you think about like the archetype of the fool, in like an old play, there's often a lot of sense underlying the humour. And we saw that here, actually, when he's really playing up to his character, because in one of the scenes, he's at the kind of DI workshop and it's a black woman leading it. And she makes the point that she feels unsafe every time she goes in to lead this session for a white group. And he, in character, really over-eggs it and says, but why do you feel unsafe? But actually, underlying that's a very serious question. What on earth does she have to feel unsafe about in that scenario?
Yeah.
And so,
but this is the language of harm and safety and, all of that stuff, isn't it?
So I hope that people... I hope we can move beyond. Look, I enjoyed it. I was laughing at parts of it. I thought it was crazy. It made me smile. He's very good, as you say, at being a kind of provocateur. I hope that people can also move beyond that and realise that there is a serious element to this. And I feel, from a therapeutic perspective, which is where I come at these things, that we are exacerbating kind of mental ill health amongst society, encouraging this kind of eternal victimhood status. I don't think is doing anyone any favours. So I hope that once people have had a laugh, they can realise, actually, we do need to get a grip on this. Yeah.
He said at one point, I wrote it down, he said, they're selling us the disease and telling us there's no cure. So you can see why this is like endless kind of cash cow for them. It's also worth noting that I wrote down that Robin DiAngelo has done workshops for Netflix, Google, Amazon, and Snapchat. I'm sure there are many more, but it's interesting to know that these people are definitely getting into large organizations and pushing these messages. In terms of solutions, I don't know. I feel like I don't have the answers. I think the organizations have the answers. I think they're beginning to realize that some of this stuff has got out of control and gone off the rails. I think the legal cases that are coming through should never have got as far as they have. I think they're realizing that this stuff is creating problems, not just for their brand kind of externally, which is the kind of go woke, go broke stuff. Customers hate it. But I think also from the inside, I've talked to Neil about how we're creating problems for productivity, both people that are really into this stuff and not working as hard as they should be, possibly. People that are not into it are either working from home or just disengaging a bit and stopping caring about their work as much, and just giving a bit less of themselves, which is really bad news. You don't want people doing that. You want people to feel really like they can say anything and be really engaged with the role. And then I think there's a big impact on retention. Seems to be a lot of senior women leaving the workplace. So if your critical thinkers are leaving because they don't want to work somewhere anymore because it feels like a really weird environment, and they saw someone else getting ticked off for raising a question, they think this is not as nice as it used to be, I don't want to work here anymore. That's a retention issue. Then there's the grievances, and there's the court cases, which are very expensive. The one for Lloyd's Banking Group cost them £1 million in the end. That should never have got to court. And then I think there's also an impact on employer brand, which is most people don't know such a thing exists, but they actually spend a lot of money on what people think of your brand as a place to work. So, and I'm wondering how many women who might be looking for a role in retail want to go and work at John Lewis after all this stuff. What message are you sending about who is really welcome here and who is not welcome here? And you're losing talent that would otherwise apply to you is going to go, actually, no, I'm not going to apply. I'm going to apply to your competitor because I don't like all that stuff that you're doing. So I think it's having an impact on them from the inside as well. And I think that's why, for me, the corporate world is the bit that's moving. I think they're going to grasp the nettle soonest. I think you've got these problems everywhere in every sector, as far as I can see. But I think particularly bad in charity, in the arts. Universities are pretty bad. Where else is bad? Journalism, pretty bad. Publishing, terrible. But I think the corporate world is interesting because bad DEI is such bad business that's what's going to make them think, we need to do this differently. And it's becoming easier to raise questions for people that are still in these organizations who are thinking, this is not right. We need to talk about the fact that we haven't got this right yet. That it's easier for them to raise questions when they've got a business reason to do so. And they can say, I think our strategy is not going to work this year because I think our DEI bit is not quite right. Let's talk about that again. Or, did you see that happen to that organization? I think that we could run that same risk. I think we need to go back and check our policy on that because I don't think that's right. Let's make sure. And there's a problem with the CIPD guidance. Let's check that again. Who are our lawyers? Are we sure we feel confident in them? It's easier to raise concerns when there's a business reason. And as we know about the corporates, it's all about the profit. It's all about the dollar. So I think in the end, capitalism is going to help to get everybody through this. I mean, I think 2025 is going to be bumpy because I think a lot of people have got very used to having their own way and are not aware of the fact that a lot of the stuff that has come into the workplace as fact is, and kind of uncontested, progressive kind of policy is actually not as popular as they thought it was, and there's going to be a readjustment, let's just say. But I think that's going to be bumpy. But there's no other way through it than to start talking about it.
I sincerely hope you're right.
I'm not sure about the public sector. You'd know more than me about how that's going. Not great.
Well, even in the private sector. I mean, just yesterday when I was watching television, I ended up posting something online about this, but I saw an advert for E45, the skincare company, and they've released an entire advert based around trans women and non-binary people using their products, and it's actually a real two fingers up to people who have got concerns in this space. They've got this man identifying as a woman in the bath, and then on the radio it says, it's like a news promo. It's like, and time to talk more about that anti-trans stuff or whatever. And then this trans person in the bath rolls their eyes and just sinks under the suds. And then anyway, the whole spiel is, my space to be myself where I can be reborn or something like this. I posted this online. Last I looked, it's been viewed over 500,000 times, and person after person saying, I've used E45 for years. I'm no longer using this. This doesn't speak to me as a customer. And surely, if it was all about the business, as you say, surely they could have foreseen that, because how big a market really is there from these kind of trans-identified individuals, whereas they risk alienating kind of their larger market base over this. And that what tells me that it's not just about finance. I think some of these people view it as their responsibility as a corporate leader to be activists, to kind of and promote change in the world that they want to see. And that's why the thing I want to see more than anything is institutional impartiality. That's what I think we should be trying to roll across both public and private sector institutions, which is that actually do your job, do what the customers are paying you to do, and leave the politics to somebody else, because by and large, your customers don't want it and your staff don't want it either. That's my view on it,
I think some of the missteps are helpful because it gives them a case study of, oh God, we've now got this huge problem, which is that this pain in the ass guy called James Esses has written this blog post, and then we're getting a whole load of backlash from all our customers who I would think are probably middle-aged women with dry skin, who are not into this stuff. So it's like, oh, actually, was this just, some people are into it, some people aren't into it. But even if you're alienating half your customers, why are you doing that when you didn't need to do that? I think some of it, I don't know if you'll remember this, but I remember the original Dove adverts, which were all about regular women in their pants, looking happy and healthy, women of all colours, all sizes. And that genuinely felt like really fresh and new in 2004 or whatever it was. And I think a lot of them have tried to recapture that. I think they saw that as a kind of a social kind of a way that we can be part of pushing for positive change. And I think a lot of it comes back to that. That was such a classic thing of women my age, I'm 45, are generally like, oh, the Dove adverts. But this is not the same, because this is just something so much more controversial. It's so much more divisive. It's so much more complex. It's just not the same. But I think they're still in love with that idea. I think advertising agencies are still in love with that idea. Presumably the marketing director will have signed that off. Now, does the marketing director love all this stuff? I don't know. Or do they just feel pressure from below? The younger people all think it's cool and they all love it. So fine, I'll just go along with it. I don't really get it. I think it's a bit divisive, some of this stuff, but fine. If they think it's okay, I'll just go along with it. A lot of senior people seem to have lost their confidence around this stuff, as younger people have been more present in the workforce because older people are working from home. And suddenly younger people have kind of taken over the workplace and created all the norms. So when people do come back to the office, they're like, oh no, this all feels a bit weird. I'm not sure I want to, spend that much more time here. So I think loads of different things have gone wrong at the same time, and you haven't had enough sensible heads going, hang on a minute, I don't think this is quite right for us. And I just think people lost their confidence. But I believe there are still sensible people there. But I think they want to speak up. I think they've wanted to speak up for a long time, actually, but it's been very, very difficult. And I don't think it's just the case that they haven't had the guts. I think it's been extremely difficult, and they have seen other people try to speak up and been ushered out. And they've thought, well, I don't want to do that. I don't think, and not only do I want an easy life, but there's clearly no benefit to speaking up. I'm just going to have to find a new job. Like, who gains from that? And the next person that takes my job might be crazier than me. And maybe I want to stay here and try and steer the ship. I don't know. But I do think this is not going to fix itself. And I think we have to talk about it. And I actually think the employers are in the best place to fix it. The sensible ones, I want to bring them together so they can talk to each other and say, okay, some of this has gone a bit off the rails. Let's try and pull it back and figure it out together. I don't have the answers to all of it. Thank you so much for doing this, because I think it's really important that they understand what the people that don't like DEI are actually thinking. And I've learned a lot from this, even though you and I have spoken before. So I really appreciate getting into the nitty gritty of what we agree on and what we don't agree on, because I think it actually helps to move the conversation forward. And I haven't heard this kind of conversation before, so I hope other people will appreciate it as well. Did you learn anything new, or did you just get yourself all worked up?
No, I actually enjoyed it, and we covered some ground that I don't normally get to talk about. And even though we disagree, I don't like you any less. I'm not judging you for it. I hope that we can role model to people that it is perfectly possible to have disagreements with people and still remain collegiate and respectful and all the rest of it, because human beings are unique. I will say that. We are very unique, and we need to rub shoulders with people that we've got nothing in common with. But so I've actually enjoyed the conversation. Do you have my bank details, by the way? Because I know, I charge a hefty fee for these kind of it's about $15,000.
Is it 15? I thought it might be. Yeah, you might be waiting for that for some time. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you again.
Thanks, Tanya.